Will you have $100? No, you will not. Hi everybody, my name is Joey and I'm the Perfect Score Tutor. So for those of you who don't know me, I've been in test prep for about 15 years right now. I've gotten perfect scores on the SAT and ACT, and I've coached 9 students to perfect scores as well. So in this video, I'll be sharing with you the top mistakes that all my students make when it comes to standardized tests. So in my experience, I've probably seen well over 100 standardized tests by now, and I've scoured through all of them and tried to categorize the most common mistakes my students make. Now, these are mistakes that students from all levels make. Even my top scorers will make these mistakes at the very beginning. So I want to go over a few caveats with you before I go into those mistakes. So the first thing you have to realize is that these standardized tests are not like your school tests. Typically, when you take a test at school, your teachers aren't out to get you, right? They just want to test the content knowledge. You kind of have to reframe your mind when it comes to taking these standardized tests. If it were as easy as a school test, then everybody would be getting A's on them, right? The next thing you have to realize is that these mistakes exploit fundamental weaknesses in academic content. What that means is you really need to be solid on your basic reading, your basic grammar, and your basic math skills. If you have those solid foundations, you're less likely to fall for these traps. The next thing is that it really requires true content mastery to be able to spot tricks. If you just do a couple practice questions here or there, or just take 1 or 2 practice tests, you're likely gonna fall for those tricks because you haven't learned yet how to recognize them. So if you go online, you'll see a bunch of test prep videos spouting tips and tricks or test hacks. And the thing you have to recognize is that these only work a portion of the time. These test writers are paid a lot of money to come up with questions that thwart all these tricks. So my final note is that utilize in conjunction with proper academic foundation building and learning how to spot these test tricks, you'll be able to master the exam. All right, so mistake number 1, and this mistake I'm gonna say applies to just about any question you can think about. It's relying on sound. Whenever I ask a student who's just beginning, why did you pick that answer? Inevitably, they'll say something like, oh, it sounded the best. Now, you can't go about this test sounding things out because it tests proper grammar foundations. So let's look at this example over here. Number 41, it says, because it was felled by an axe, he explained, the tree was probably cut in the mid-19th century. So students will see, okay, they're probably testing commas, right? Because there's just a bunch of commas sprinkled throughout the answer choices. And so then they think back to elementary school and oh, Mrs. Smith taught me that whenever I pause, I should put in a comma. So what you really need to understand is that whenever you have a phrase like he explained in the middle of a sentence, that's called a non-essential clause. And when you have a non-essential clause, you need to surround them with commas. So the correct answer actually is B. Example number 2, now we have in 2011, knitter Jessie Hemmons decided she'd had enough of people. And so students will do the same thing in reverse now because they're now thinking, okay, sometimes I have non-essential information. So they'll be like, in 2011, knitter Jessie Hemmons, and then they'll put a bunch of random pauses in the sentence too. So this one actually is F, because when you have a title, it works as an adjective. And then when you have the name right after, you do not want to separate that title or the adjective from the name. So the correct answer is F. And I'm going to tell you that this question shows up on every single SAT and ACT grammar test. Mistake number 2, so not understanding grammatical meaning. So this is kind of an offshoot of mistake number 1, but let's read this question over here. It says, Lou flags down a passerby who has an intriguing face, offering to create a tiny silhouette portrait, needing just a small piece of black paper, razor-sharp scissors, and a few minutes. So just by sound alone, right, it sounds like maybe F is correct because you see offering and needing. But grammatically speaking, if you have something called a participle, this word that ends in ing, and you have an independent clause here, then you need a comma to separate that independent clause from the participial phrase. So that's not F. Even though it sounds correct, you gotta understand the grammar rule. Now G, having offered, puts it into past tense, and that doesn't work in the context of this sentence. Then we have H, that offers, that also sounds correct, but the grammatical meaning implies that the face would be the thing that's offering to create the silhouette portrait. That doesn't work contextually here. So then we have J, and offers. That's when we're combining an independent clause with some sort of phrase or dependent clause. So that's the correct answer. Here's another one that a lot of my students have made a mistake on. So we're asked to put sentence 5 somewhere. And then so we see over here, since the inaugural Repair Cafe, others have been hosted. So I'm gonna pay attention to this verb tense here. And if you're familiar with verb tenses, you'll recognize that this is a form of the present perfect tense. Okay, so present perfect tense is not past tense. That's something that I emphasize over and over with my students. What present perfect tense does is it glues simple past tense and simple perfect tense. So if we go through this entire passage, you'll see that the first sentence is in past tense, the second sentence is in past tense, the third sentence is in past tense as well. Then we go to sentence number 4, we switch from past tense to present tense. So then logically speaking, we would put sentence 5 in between sentence 3 and 4 because it acts as a bridge. Mistake number 3, ignoring clauses. So you've heard me reference clauses already, right? And so this is a throwback to that first question. You need to understand that when sentences have multiple clauses, then that requires a use of punctuation usually to set aside those clauses. Now what's a clause? A clause is any phrase that has a subject and a verb. So if we look at this sentence, right, we have it, that's your subject, and was, right? You have a subject-verb combination there. We have he and explained right there. And then we have the tree was probably cut. So we have 3 subjects and verbs, right? So that clearly indicates that we need some sort of a positive clause here. So that's why that one would be B. So let's look at this more complicated example using clauses. So this sentence starts with for example, so we can actually cross that out because it's non-essential. And then we have in Emmanuel Lutz's Washington crossing the Delaware. It's in between commas, it's a prepositional phrase, and it's not essential too. So then we have the president, that's your subject, verb, strikes, a noble pose on a boat. Complete sentence. And the next part goes, experts now agree could not have been the vessel. Reading that out loud is like, what does that even mean? Experts now agree could not have been the vessel. It's missing some sort of object there, right? So what we can do is they do this thing called the imaginary that. They're creating an essential phrase and obscuring it. So all of a sudden, if I stuck the word that there, the sentence might make more sense. The president strikes a pose on a boat that experts agree could not have been the vessel that carried the revolutionary leader across the river. We're trying to describe the boat here, but they complicated it by removing a crucial key word. And why? Well, they want to trick you, but also because they use the word that over here, right? So if you recognize that you have another subject and verb combo, you need to check. Maybe there's a hidden essential clause there. So the correct answer is B. Mistake number 4, I'm not going to tell you what the mistake is because I want you to look at question number 38 and think about what you think the answer is. So a lot of my students will read, the clock keeps precise time for, can you believe it, over 40 years. And they'll be like, the clock keeps, the clock has kept, oh, okay. Has kept probably sounds right. And then they'll move on with their life. That's wrong. So what I did on this slide here is I included the context, which was actually on the page before. So question number 38 actually came after a page turn, and the mistake that students make is they're like, okay, I'm just going to narrow in on what I see in front of me. But if you pay attention to all this context from the page before, you'll see, oh, this was in 1753, 250 plus years ago, right? And then the clock kept time for 40 years. Well, 40 years after 1753 would still be in the 1700s, right? So the correct answer actually is H because we're in past tense. So then what is mistake number 4? Not paying attention to context. So let me give you another example that kind of fits into this category. So this is question number 35 on an SAT exam, and I noticed that these types of questions come really late in the SAT exam. So there's 44 questions, so once you pass that like 30 threshold, that's when they'll throw in these types of tricks with you. So here we have, in one study, researchers found that many birds are able to use simple tools such as twigs to search for food. Okay, so we have the subject and then we have the verb, right? And then we also have this idea of the imaginary that again, right? So they found that many birds are able to use simple tools, or they found many birds are able to use simple tools. So from knowing that alone, then you can be like, well, it's probably not A or D because they're very, very similar, if not the same. So then we need to stick in one of these words here, like indeed or whereas, and then the student will go, well, indeed sounds better, right? Because we use that in scientific passages, but it's actually not that one. So what you need to do is you need to keep going down the sentence. Don't just stop at the comma, right? Always read from maybe a sentence before to maybe a sentence after, because there could be a clue there. So what do we have after the comma? We have the New Caledonian crow, that's your subject. We have a corvid species, so that's a non-essential phrase there. Crafts sophisticated hook-shaped tools. So here we have an independent clause. You cannot connect two independent clauses with a comma. So going back to mistake number 2, right? Know your grammatical meaning. So the correct answer here is C, because whereas creates a subordinating conjunction, making the first sentence a dependent clause. Here's another example. So we're looking at question number 4. Should we keep or delete the preceding sentence? And then the sentence is the first line was always present. And then a typical response would be like, oh, that's kind of a short sentence. Like, what does it do? Like, I don't think it does anything. So then a lot of students will choose H. Please don't be the one to choose J, because I talked about that in one of my other videos, which I'll link below, but contradicts is a very strong, very bad word. But it's also not H either. And why not? Because if you look at the next sentence, it says, depending on the presence or absence of the remaining 3 lines. You can't talk about the remaining 3 lines if you don't reference the first line, right? So then the correct answer here is F. Mistake number 5, not answering the question. So my AP English teacher, on the wall in front of the whiteboard right above it, he always had a big poster that says answer the question. So I'm gonna posit that to you. Make sure you answer the question, because a lot of students will go through and do the work and then they won't answer the question. So let's try this one, right? So a lot of students start off by squaring both sides. So then the square of a square root is just going to be, let me get rid of that. It's just gonna be x minus 3. And then on the right side, don't make this mistake. It is not 9 plus x. You have to remember that when you're squaring a binomial, you need to distribute. That's another mistake. Not as common though, but don't fall for that mistake, right? We're gonna FOIL. First is 3 times 3 is 9. Outside is 3 times rad x. Inside is 3 times rad x. And last is rad x plus rad x is regular x. Then we're going to combine like terms. So I'm gonna subtract x from both sides. I'm going to, let's say, subtract 9 from both sides. So these cancel out. I get negative 12 over here. If I combine these two, I get negative 6 rad x. And then you divide both sides by negative 6. So then you get 2 is equal to rad x. And then you get x is equal to 4 when you square both sides. And then students are like, I don't see a 4. I'm just gonna, I don't know, circle the closest one. So maybe I'll circle 3 or something. So what you're supposed to do after you do any math question, go back to the question. It says, if x is the solution to the equation, what is the value of rad x minus 3? So then you go through and plug in x is equal to 4 here. So your correct answer is A. Here's another one from grammar. So whenever they give you words before a question, they're not wasting space. They're trying to trick you per se. In fact, here's like the opposite. If you're lazy, then you won't answer the question correctly. Read the question. It says, which choice most effectively illustrates that the drive up the volcano was unsettling for the narrator? So well-traveled sounds not unsettling. Steep tangle of road looming definitely sounds unsettling, right? And so it's none of the other 3, but I think students are so used to using just like neutral language that they don't want to choose the long one or the wordy one. Here's a bonus combo. I think this question here has like a 99% miss rate just because students don't want to pick the correct answer. They're like, it sounds awful. And like, I don't care if it sounds awful. Make sure you answer the question. So it says, which choice would most logically and effectively emphasize the positive, friendly attitude the narrator has? The first one says move slowly. That's probably not positive, right? Travel safely. That one sounds good, right? So a lot of students will lean towards that one. C also sounds good, proceeds carefully. But then D says purrs softly. And a typical student, let's say, would be like, who in their right mind would refer to this motorized vehicle as something that purrs? For context, this was about a wheelchair. So a lot of students don't choose that. But if you think about it, it's the most positive one, right? Purring is something that you associate with friendliness, I guess, right? So the correct answer here is D. Mistake number 6. So this is one that's really useful if you're going to take an advanced math class, pre-calculus, calculus, beyond. Students don't graph their answers, and graphing is a fully valid technique to often simplify the mathematical process. So let's look over here, right? We have 2 equations. This already trips students out. When there's just too many letters, students are like, I have no idea what to do. But I think most students should recognize that this is a line. And if you're taking the test, you need to recognize that this is an exponential function. Furthermore, you should also understand what their graphs look like. So let me just do a quick sketch. It says that they both go through the point 1, 3 and 2, 4. So then if we were to graph the line through that point, I'm just going to do my best to draw a line and not miss the dots. So I tried my best. Oh, that shouldn't have happened. Let's try one more time. So I'm going to try my best to draw the line through the dots. I almost made it, so there's the line. And then we're going to try to fit the exponential equation through the dots, right? So exponential equations start off asymptotically, there's your vocab word for the day, and then starts to increase and goes like that. Now it says the point RS is on the graph of the linear equation. So then this would have R's and S's. And then it says RT is on the graph of the exponential equation. So this would have R's and T's. So they're saying where R is between 0 and 4, when is S greater than T? So when you're looking at the graph of equations, greater means above the equation, right? Where is S? Where is the line greater than T, the exponential curve? Well, the line is greater than the curve right about here. And so that's between the points 1 and 2. And so the correct answer here is B. Now there are a ton of algebraic ways you can try to do this, but graphing will save you a lot of time and energy. Mistake number 7, students tend not to make work concrete. And that's what the test makers love to exploit. They'll throw concepts, abstractions, letters at you during a math question. So let's look at this one, right? So during an ice age, the average annual global temperature was at least 4 degrees Celsius lower than the modern average. That phrase alone trips up a lot of students. But let's keep going. It says the average annual temperature of an ice age is Y. So to orient myself, I may say that, right? Y is equal to ice age. And the modern average temperature is X degrees, so X is equal to modern. Which one must be true? Okay, so then we'll go here. It says the average global temperature was at least 4 degrees. So students think of at least. Okay, so they'll be like, okay, Y was before, right? And then they think at least. At least means greater than. So greater than or equal to. And it says 4 degrees lower. So for lower, you're going to do -4 at the end than the modern ice age. So then they'll come up with this equation and then think, oh my gosh, I'm so smart. But you really need to put on your thinking caps when you get to the end of a multiple choice section. This is question number 26 out of 30, right? So the questions are not as easy as they appear. So let's go through and make it concrete then. So let's make a table. So ice age, logically ice age would be colder, right? So let's just come up with random numbers. So for today, the average temperature is 100. And we go by this question, it says the average global temperature was at least 4 degrees Celsius lower. Okay, so 4 degrees Celsius lower would be 96. Don't pay attention to these numbers because if it were that temperature, we'd all be dead, but that's beside the point. So 100, 96, we could also do 100. If we want at least, maybe we go to 95, right? Or we could go 100 today and then 94 before. So those are all options. And let's go plug it into our equation, right? So 96 is greater than or equal to 100 minus 4. Oh, okay, that works, right? 96 is greater than 96, greater than or equal to. Then we do 95. 95 is greater than or equal to 100 minus 4. That one doesn't work, right? 95 is not greater than or equal to 96. So by plugging in these numbers, we realize that the correct answer is D. Mistake number 8, trusting the graphs or trusting the figures. So when you get a graph or figure at school, typically speaking, right, everything is straightforward. There's not anything you need to watch out for. Maybe you have one of those teachers who like to trick you. If you do, leave a comment below about that. But let's look at this question here. This is 28 again, out of 30. So if we look at the graph, so it's like, oh great, it's a line. I know everything about lines. So let me make like a triangle. Okay, so it's going over 2 boxes and it's going up 1 box. So maybe the slope is about a half. Okay, so the slope is about a half. So it's one of these. Oh, and let me see the y-intercept. The y-intercept is here, a little bit above 60. So the correct answer is D. And they're like, yeah, I did it in 10 seconds. Let me move on. But you gotta stop, right? So let's check the graph. What did they do to trick you here? Number one, if we look at the scale of the x-axis, it's going over in 20s. The scale of the y-axis is going up in 10s. So the scale is off. So my recommendation for these types of questions is to actually calculate the slope by picking 2 points that are far apart. Don't pick 2 points that are close together. Your estimates might be far off, versus by picking 2 far across points, you'll get a closer estimate. So that's why it's not B or D. And then if we look at the y-intercept, I always ask students, define what a y-intercept is, and they have to be able to say back to me, a y-intercept occurs when x equals 0. Let's look at this graph. X is not 0 here, x is 140. So almost by default, without even doing the math, I can actually circle A as my correct answer, but I want you to get in the habit of doing it for real. Mistake number 9, one that you can use in everyday life. Students like to believe that percentages are reversible. So let me give you a concrete example that you might see. Let's say, for example, today you have $100, and then you lose 5% tomorrow, but then the following day you gain back 5%. Will you have $100? No, you will not. Why not? Let's try it out mathematically, right? So you start off with $100. If you lose 5%, you can go ahead and be like, okay, I'm going to times by 0.95. That's the shortcut for losing 5%. So then you get $95. I think everybody agrees that if you lose 5%, you get $95. But then what happens is if you gain back 5%, you're not gaining back 5% of $100, you're gaining back 5% of $95. So you have 95 times 1.05, and then you end up with something like 99.75. I don't have my calculator, so somebody check me on that. But you end up with slightly less than you originally started with. So this is a trick that a lot of people in sales like to make, and a lot of people fall for it. So please understand how percentages work. Percentages work off the new value. So let's apply to this question here though. So we have Katerina who's studying 2 different types of trees. So she noticed that tree A produced 20% more pears than tree B did. And then based on Katerina's observation, if type A trees produced 144 pears, how many pears did type B produce? So then what a lot of students will be like is, okay, well, if type A was 20% more, then I'm just gonna take that number 144 and multiply it by 0.80. That's a quick way to reduce by 20%. And then they'll get something really close to 115. I think it's like 115.2 or something. And so they'll circle A. However, percentages are not reversible. What you wanna do is write out the equation from start to finish. So we start off with A. A produced, so when you have a verb that's usually an equal sign, 20% more, so that's 1.2, than tree B, so 1.2 times B. So then you plug in the numbers, 144 is equal to 1.2B, And then when you divide both sides by 1.2, you'll get that tree B is equal to 120. With these percentage problems, the order matters, so don't try to reverse the order. Last mistake. So students tend to not pay attention to details. I don't know if it's a mistake or just a habit or something like that, but I picked one of the most common question types that this comes up with. This is a median question. So think through really quickly. If you were a test maker, how would you make a median question not so straightforward? What I've seen, 99% of the time, I'm not gonna say 100% because maybe there's a question out there I haven't seen yet, they do not list things in order. So a typical student would be like, yeah, I know median, then they'll go cross, 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 and be like, oh my gosh, it's this one, I'm so smart. But median is almost never the middle one, right? You gotta list it in order. So one thing you can do is just like rank them 1, 2, 3, let's see, this one would be number 4, this one would be number 5, this would be number 6, 7, 8, 8 is here, 9 is here, 10, 11. And for those of you who want the median equation, we're gonna do n plus 1 over 2. N is the total number of numbers. There's 11 numbers here. 11 plus 1 over 2 is 6. We're looking for the 6th one. That's the quick way to find the middle one. So which one was the 6th one? It was actually this one. So I can almost guarantee you'll see a median question on your test. So either don't choose the middle one if you're running out of time, or remember to list everything in order. So the correct answer here is C. All right, thanks everybody for watching this video. I hope you found the content helpful. I spent a lot of time scouring through all my tests to bring that content to you. If there is something that piqued your interest or blew your mind, leave a comment below. I'm curious to hear what you learned. And if there's something else that you want me to make a video on to help you, feel free to leave a comment below as well. Thanks for watching.